There's an old Indian joke that goes like this. First, one party brings up vegetarianism or veganism or whatever. Then the jokester asks, "Do you know what the Mohawk word is for vegetarian?" Or if he's a white guy, he says, "You know what the Indian word is for vegetarian?" First guy says, "No, what?" And then the punchline, "Lousy hunter." It's kind of a lame joke, but it's got a double meaning to it. The first part of it is sort of a condescending dig at vegans. Oh yeah, the only reason you're sitting there eating weeds is because you can't catch anything. You're unable to provide for your family, so you make up a moral justification for eating only spiders and leaves. The second meaning of the joke is that vegetarianism is a foreign concept. Every so often there's this notion that crops up of Precolumbian vegetarianism, particularly to agricultural societies like the Six Nations. There are various justifications for this, ideological or romantic, but the simple fact of the matter is that the concept of vegetarianism is ahistorical, and I want to talk about why. Firstly, there's the different moral outlook on life. The romantic notion of the Indian is a people living in harmony with nature. This is something that vegetarians also aspire to. And I will agree that from a modern dissociated outlook and from a general anthropocentric outlook, there is a lot of common ground between living in harmony and vegetarianism. The indigenous outlook is neither one of anthropocentrism nor dissociation. Humanity is viewed as part of the natural process and not separate from it. I have a lot of love for the deer. They're wonderful, beautiful, intelligent creatures. There's not much that makes my day more than stumbling across a deer when I'm out for a walk and just watching it for a little while. However, I also like to eat them. They are very tasty. And provided the hunter acts respectfully and doesn't take more than the forest can spare, I see no moral issue with eating venison. There is no moral contradiction between that love of deer in life and the consumption of them in death. Just like there's no contradiction between someone loving the forest and framing the house with wood. No contradiction between keeping a garden, putting your heart and soul into those little plants, and then eating them when their time is done. Moving away from the moral, I want to talk about certain practical elements. In the modern era, we are used to being able to acquire just about every food at any given time. Here in Canada, any time of year, you can go down to a grocery store and get yourself a banana, despite the fact that they don't even grow in this bloody continent. Back in the day, every plant had a brief window in which it was available. Throughout much of the year, there's no plants available. In late March, there's a few weeks of maple syrup, but you can't live on that alone as it's just sugar. Then there's nothing edible in April or May. The strawberries ripen towards the end of June, but you don't get a good harvest of them unless you cultivated the land. Then the raspberries and the mulberries in July. Then nothing in early August, but towards the end of the month the green corn will be ready for eating. Then in September the nuts start to ripen, and then October the pumpkins. And then winter comes and you have to live on your stockpiles until mid-June again. Throughout about half the year there's no fresh plants available. You would either have to live off of dried corn and beans and hope that you had stockpiled enough, or else hunting and fishing. Then there's the amount of effort that is required by many of these plants. We're used to the modern era where there's big machines to do all the grunt labor for us, but back in the day that was all done by hand. Let me give you an example. Walnuts are very tasty, very calorie dense, and very nutritious. However, it's a lot of work to get them out of the shell. You need to pound them with a hammer or in a mortar and pestle, after which you need to pick the broken chunks of meat out of the broken chunks of shell. Let's pick another food. What about raspberries? These are fairly straightforward to acquire. You just go out to the bush and you start picking them. The difficulty with raspberries is that you need a heck of a lot of them to feed yourself. Despite how tasty berries are, they're mostly water. It takes about 4 kilograms of berries to feed one person for a day. About 9 pounds of berries per person per day. What about the primary crop, corn? Well, most people these days are either familiar with corn on the cob or else frozen corn. Well, no freezers back in the olden days, so corn was left to mature and dry out on the stalk so that it would keep for a long time. This corn then needs to be heavily processed before it can be eaten. This is due to the thick hull that corn develops to aid preservation. Everybody's aware of the jokes about corn and digestive tracts. So in order to make it edible, you either have to lye the corn or else mill it, or else both. I couldn't find any information about milling corn, and I don't have any dried corn to test for myself, but I did find an article talking about milling wheat with a hand quern. It found that it took between an hour and 2 hours to mill a kilogram of wheat. I don't imagine corn would be a million miles off. The other method of processing, lying corn, supposedly takes about 4 or 5 hours, but it's got the advantage of you can do it in bulk. 10 pounds is not twice as much work as 5 pounds, and so on. Now if you compare all of this to meat, Meat is available all throughout the year. It comes in large doses. A single deer will feed a family for a week. The amount of effort it takes, while heavily variable, is still relatively low. You might get lucky and catch one in no time at all, or it might take you a week, it might take you two. Even at the extreme, it's still not a million miles off from the time it takes to mill corn. The final point I want to make is about the importance of leather. The historical value of leather cannot be understated. Even setting aside the excellent qualities of leather, the simple fact of the matter is that for clothing there wasn't really any alternative. There are only a few animals in North America with hair suitable for making wool, just mountain goats and muskox. The mountain goats live way the heck out west in the Rockies, and the muskox live way the heck up in the north. So clearly neither of those are options, so what about plant sources of clothing? Cotton existed in the Americas back in the day, but it only likes warm climates, so it's not suitable for most of the continents. Milkweed and dogbane were used for making cordage, in a process similar to the production of linen. However, unlike the flax plant, milkweed and dogbane don't like to grow in high-density populations, preferring to grow here and there, meaning that they're not really suitable for clothing a nation. The final option might be cedar bark, like was used by the peoples of Vancouver Island. Cedar bark was used over here for mats, but I don't know about clothing. My only skepticism is whether it's warm enough for the climate. I know that over in Vancouver it hardly ever goes below freezing. Well, the rest of Canada we can get -20, -30. To summarize this segment, throughout most of the continent there was no substitute for leather, nothing that would do its job as well or better. So let's talk about how much leather people would require. I estimate that at minimum, each person is going to require 2 sets of clothing. A set of buckskins for spring, summer, fall, and a set of furs for winter. Each set of clothing is going to take about 5 deerskins. 3 for the shirt, 1 for the legs, 1 for the moccasins, and miscellaneous. So 10 deer to fully clothe one person. A deer is enough to feed a big family for a week. So 10 deer, that's a fifth of your yearly calorie requirements. Now, leather lasts a long time, and you don't have to replace all of your clothing every year, but you've also got a lot of people in your family, so you're going to be going through a lot of deer just for the leather alone. So I suppose I've said everything I have to say on the matter. In conclusion, vegetarianism is a modern idea. There you go, how do you like that? 8-minute videos that could have been a tweet. Anyway, I hope you found at least part of this interesting.